For over 200 years now, the world has been run by railways. With machines so strong that it's taken the world to new levels. From building bridges to connecting countries, these railways have done a lot. But how exactly have they impacted the world? Or more importantly, how are each of them different? Today we answer this more and continue on in this series. Welcome to Railways Round the World. And hello everybody! Welcome to Railways Around the World, a brand new series that I thought of for quite a long time, which we will discuss railways all across the world. This is an idea that I had based on how many viewers that I noticed that were skyrocketing across my more international located videos. And I know it's been a while since I've uploaded, but I think it's finally time to get back on track, and I've been quite busy recently, so appreciate you all being patient, and thank you so much for help me growing this channel. It's growing so fast and growing to new heights. So let's start with the basics and start with the tank engine all the way from Great Britain. Today's episode will be discussing the N7 GR Class L77 062T locomotives. So let's start with their history. Although the Great Eastern Railway's GER London suburban services were amongst the most intense and heavy loaded in the country, the GER operated them with relatively small 242Ts in the early 1900s. The GER considered electrification in 1902, but this was soon abandoned. To handle the heavier loads, Holden produced a plan for an 062T in 1907. This was never built, but it was not until 1915 that Hill built two 062Ts to handle the heavier loads. Superheating was still a new concept, so no one was superheated as a comparison. Number 1000 was built with a saturated boiler, and number 1001 was built with a 12-element Robinson superheater. The driving wheels had a relatively small diameter of 4 foot 10 inches, 4 inches smaller than those on the earlier F4s. Wall stretchers, valve gear, piston valves, and Belpaire firebox were fitted. Intended to replace the range of 044Ts and 242Ts, the N7 had a controlled side traverse to the leading coupled axle boxes in order to provide some flexibility in the wheelbase. This was similar to the mechanism used on the trailing power axle on the B12, with the same number of axles as the earlier locomotives, but with a heavier total weight. The N7s represented a significant increase in adhesive weight. Boiler was built with two telescoping rings with a large diameter ring at the front. Boiler of the original locomotives were fitted with twin anti-vacuum valves on the smoke box behind the chimney for use with piston valves. On the superheated locomotive, they also performed the function of admitting air to the elements. The boiler feed was using Churchward's arrangement with clack valves on either side on the dome. 4-column Robinson safety valves were fitted in a rectangular casing. With the success, 10 more saturated N7s were built in 1921 and were followed by 10 superheated examples in 1923 to 1924. These were all the original GER designs, although the superheaters were increased in size to 18 elements. All of the GER sections locomotives were built at Stratford. The N7 design impressed the LNER and was adopted as a group saturated to complement Gresley's N2062T design. The N7s had small wheels and were able to accelerate quickly, making them the ideal for suburban services between closely positioned stations. The LNER built a total of 112 group standard N7s between 1925 and 1928 in 5 batches. These were built at Gordon, Robert Stephenson, W. Beardmore, and Doncaster. By this point, the LNER had stopped building new locomotives at Stratford due to the high London wages and under pressure from the government, who were trying to solve unemployment problems further north. The LNER engines were intended to work in the south and had their boiler mountings and cab cut down to fit their metropolitan city widened lines. They were also left-handed drive. Condensing gear was fitted to all of the GR locomotives, but was removed from any locomotives during LNER ownership. Some built their condensing gear for working the Eastern London line via the Thames Tunnel. The remaining condensing gear was removed from all N7s between 1935 and 1938. The LNER added a number of modifications to the later batches. Long travel valve gear and a pony trucks were fitted on the last 72 N7s. The last 32 were built at Doncaster in a Doncaster-style round-topped fireboxes, instead of the original bell-pair design. The rounded-topped boilers were in line with contemporary LNER practice, and were also fitted with 18-element Robinson superheaters. The LNER had constructed 5 spare 18-element superheated boilers before the round-topped boiler was adopted. From 1928, these were fitted to the saturated engines. The remaining saturated locomotives were alternatively to carry 18-element superheaters, and number 1001's 12-element superheater was upgraded to 18 elements. By September of 1931, all 22 GER N7s fitted with 18-element Robinson superheaters. The round-topped boiler design became the N7 standard and was used for all boiler replacements after 1940. Eventually, all except 2 of the bell-pair locomotives would be rebuilt with round-topped boilers. Many of the later boilers were fitted with Ross Pop safety valves instead of the original Rasmbottoms valves. The positioning of the valve gear proved to be problematic. The cramped location resulted in less than an ideal linkages, and heavy forces acted on parts of the gear. The combination lever pin experienced heavy wear, and anchor bracket bolts often failed. The problem with the bolts was only solved in the early 1940s, when the bolts were replaced with a weld between the anchor bracket and the crosshead. The locomotives with longer travel valve gear also experienced bent valve spindles and even breakage of the anchor bracket. This resulted in a design of the bracket for a long travel valve gear locomotives. The N7 valve gear also suffered under the GE section practice of coasting with the engine in full gear, followed by a sudden change in cutoff at speed. This would often result in a complete failure in the valve motion. During the 1930s, the GE section had a campaign that attempted to get drivers to coast at half cutoff. This reduced the failures, but they still occurred occasionally. After number 69721's valve gear disintegrated at speed in 1956, the N7s with long valve gear were fitted with a large diameter valve spindles and heavier valve gear bushes. 6 subclasses were used to cover the various variations. The original N7 GE covered the original 22 GER built locomotives. These had a bell-pair firebox, short travel valve gears, right-hand drive, and fitted the GER loading gauge. The Class N7/1 covered the first 50 LNER gauges. These were built with left-handed drive and fitted the Metropolitan loaded gauge. Class N7/2 covered the next 30 LNER engines and introduced the long travel valve gear. Class N7/3 covered the last 32 engines and introduced the round-topped firebox. N7/4 was used to describe the N7/GE locomotives that were rebuilt with round-topped fireboxes. Similarly, the N7/5 was used for the N7/1 locomotives that were similarly rebuilt. The first two locomotives, numbers 1000 and 1001, were initially put to work on the Enfield and Chingford lines. By 1921, the first 12 engines were being used on the heavier or faster suburban trains operated by the Stratford Shed. The next batch were distributed between the West Riding, Stratford, and Hatfield. The four all allocated, the West Riding, were all reallocated to Neatiston during 1924 and 1925 to haul services to the British Empire exhibition at Wembley. The later group's standard locomotives were allocated to GN and GE, section suburban services in the London area. As they were heavier as faster suburban services, the N7s also hauled evening excursions. These were used on the boat trains from Liverpool Street to Royal Albert Dock. After World War II, electrification and the introduction of large numbers of L1264Ts resulted in a number of N7s leaving the London area. Allocations away from London were initially to Ipswich, Melton Constable, and Norwich. A number of other allocations to country sheds occurred during the 1950s, including Cambridge, Lincoln, and Staveley. During 1954, 4 N7s were allocated to Breed Bradford and Lead Castleford push-pull services at Stopgap, whilst newly introduced diesel multiple units, DMUs for short, had their teething problems fixed. The N7 survived the original suburban London services until dispatched by the introductions of DMUs and electrifications in the 1950s. Withdrawals started in 1957 and were complete by 1962. Unfortunately, only one N7 has been preserved, number 7999, or BR number 69261. This engine is owned by the East Anglia Railway Museum and is currently on load to the North Norfolk Railway, who has recently overhauled it. Originally numbered 999E, this was the last engine to be built at Stratford Works. In 1989, it was named A.J. Hill in honors of its designer. So that was the history of the N7 GR class locomotives. What an interesting history, I would have to say. From being one of the strongest to, of course, being down, it's pretty interesting to see how these railways all across basically unionized these engines, from the LNER to the GER. If you are curious to know more about these engines, I will put links in the description about research that I did about these engines. I will also put other stuff. But that is the conclusion of the first episode. So that will be it for today. So like and subscribe. Follow me on my TikTok under Ology Studios. I like to post some random things about trains, so if you are interested, just let me know. And coming soon, I will be able to have a Redbubble available. So if you're interested in getting merch, I will have that available soon. But that is all for today. So have a great evening, morning, and night, and we'll see you all next week.